God-sized story.
Hello and welcome to another episode of God-Sized Stories. I'm very excited. This week I have Cathy on. Cathy, tell us about yourself.
Well, I am a little bit older and retired. I'm not going to say my age because women don't do that. I have worked in ministry over at the chapel since about 2008. Before that, I worked for Christian Youth Theater as an area coordinator. So I had some theater that it was awesome and fun, and I got to do that with my kids. Mostly, I have loved being the director of support and recovery ministries at the chapel, and it has just blessed me in crazy ways. I'm married. I have 4 children. One is a stepdaughter, and then I have two of my children are married. I don't have any grandkids yet, but hopefully that will happen soon. No pressure, kids. And so I live in Gurnee with my husband, who is also retired, and we are just getting our backyard done. And as a sort of an oasis, we don't ever have to leave the house. So we are really enjoying life right now.
Awesome. Well, as I understand it, Cathy, you've done a lot as well to inspire other people. I know a former person on the show, Jenny Cornejo, speaks high praise of the Lord in you. And I'm so blessed to have you on today and to share your story with myself and the audience at home.
I'm excited to do it. I feel like I've told my story many, many times, and it always blesses me, I think, to tell it more than it blesses others. So yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Amen. Well, I'll just give you the floor. I'll let you open up and share your heart with us.
Well, that would be great. So I am married to my husband, Kevin. He is my second husband, current husband, most permanent husband, best husband ever. I'm going to give him some kudos. We married in 1995, and it was after both of us had been through fairly traumatic divorces. Mine was just brutal. And so that really was where, in those days, I was at my lowest point. I have always struggled a little bit with depression, and that was a situation that occurred that it was hard to get out of the pit. And so I remember when I had been married about 7 years, my first husband left, and it was a very public, traumatic divorce. And my kids were 9 months old and 4 years old at the time. And so I was in a tizzy of just desperation and depression. And it was just the lowest point I'd ever been in my life. I remember somebody saying to me, just trying to help me out, and said, Cathy, everything happens for a reason. And I said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard anybody say, because it felt like that kind of pain was incredibly pointless. And so I really didn't know the Lord very well back then. I had been raised Catholic and went to church every week with my family, but I didn't know Jesus. I didn't really understand Holy Spirit power. I didn't really understand relationship. I really didn't know the Bible, but I knew that God was real. And so I remember in my desperation just crying out, and just, he was kind of my crisis interventionist at the time. I really only went to him when I had terrible problems, and so this was one of them. I remember one night sitting in my living room in my very small house in Gurnee, and it was right after my first husband had left, and my kids were in bed, And I remember sitting in my living room and just feeling this incredible wave of hopelessness come over me. And I thought to myself, this is just too painful. I just cannot do this anymore. And I remember being able to sort of see myself across the room. It was almost like I couldn't even really attach to my body at that point. It was just such a severe hopelessness. And right at that moment, I heard my daughter cry from the bedroom. And it was a really small house, so it was a very easy thing to hear. And so it kind of snapped me back into reality. And I walked into the bedroom where she was laying in her crib. Now remember, she's only 9 months old. And I looked down and she's sound asleep. And I remember thinking, well, she always used a pacifier. And I thought, well, of course the pacifier's on the floor somewhere. And maybe she cried and went back to sleep, but the pacifier was in her mouth. And right at that very moment, I remember almost this audible voice saying to me, you can't go anywhere. I have called you to raise these children and you need to stay. And it was almost like, I don't think God has ever spoken to me more audibly since then, but it was almost as though he was in the room speaking to me. And I can tell you that while the rest of that journey was not easy, I never, ever thought about ending my life after that. I just never did. I knew he wasn't going to permit it. And so I didn't even think about it after that. It was tough. I'm not saying that I was healed and everything was rosy, but that really, he delivered me from that, which was amazing. I look back at that time and I think that was probably the first time on my journey to where I am now that I knew that God was real and that he actually could speak to us. It was really just kind of an incredible feeling. And that did not, of course, take away how hard it was, but I knew that I wasn't alone and I knew I had a purpose and I knew I wasn't permitted to leave. And he didn't say it in a way that was condemning or angry. It was very firm and very clear and very like, you still have a purpose and I've called you to this purpose and you need to fulfill it. So that incident was probably the thing that really started me on a journey to try and figure out who this God was. About 4 years later, I married my husband, Kevin, and it was a rough start. It was a rough start. He and I were completely broken people because we had gone through divorce. I would say probably I was more broken than he was. But he and I had a lot of issues when we first got married. And I remember thinking, when the lawyer told me on my way home from my divorce being final, I remember thinking, I'm not anybody's wife anymore. And when I became somebody's wife again, it just triggered all of these doubts, all of this pain, all of this difficulty. Because when you get divorced, you typically don't have anybody. There's not a lot of closure unless you do it yourself, right? There's not a lot of closure unless God comes in and says,
Sure.
Here, let's work on this together, because that person that you had that break with is gone and you're not in relationship really with them anymore, other than to parent if you have children. So, so that baggage I carried with me into my new marriage. And I remember thinking at one point, what have I done by marrying? I wasn't ready. And I was super angry all the time. And I hate to talk about how angry I was, because it wasn't a great time for me, but I feel like it's important to let people know that you have to figure out how to take care of yourself when you've gone through something traumatic like that. and you have to do it. Otherwise it will eat you alive and it will kill you. I mean, spiritually, emotionally, it's gonna be bad. And so I remember, see, I just lost my train of thought. Hold on a second. I was really angry. That was what I was saying. No wonder I lost my train of thought. I was really angry, and my kids would say to me, Mom, like, stop swearing at me. Mom, stop yelling. Why are you so angry? And I remember yelling at my son once because he couldn't fold a towel the right way. That kind of anger is so destructive, and it's so from the enemy. And when my kids got a little older, when my marriage got a little better, which is another story that I'll tell you, but I remember apologizing to my kids and having to go back in all humility and saying, I'm really, really sorry that I didn't care for you well. But I also knew that God forgave me already. The problem was I hadn't forgiven me. And so I think sometimes we can hang on to those things when God has already told us to let them go. And that is sinful, right? It's not what he wants for us. And so that healing came a little bit later. But as for my marriage, I remember God telling me when I thought, we're going to end up in divorce. Like this is going to implode. It's going to be bad. And I'm going to have a second divorce. And I remember God telling me again, you can't leave. And he said, you need to behave in a way that shows, that demonstrates loving, godly wife to your husband. Even if you don't feel it, you have to behave that way. And so it wasn't really, it was a command, I think. And I was desperate for a solution. And so that command was like, okay, I guess I'll just do that. So that's what I did. Years later, my husband and I, when we would talk about it, he tells me that at the same time, God was working on him to say, she's in pain. Give her the benefit of every doubt that you have, because she's not mad at you. Even though it feels like she's targeting you, it's not you. And so give her the benefit of every doubt and love her well. And so here we are trying to do these things separately and not knowing that the other was hearing direction in our marriage. I really believe that God rewards obedience like that with a marriage that we could not have even imagined for ourselves. And so here we are now 25 years later, and it's the best it's ever been. My husband is an awesome man, and I feel like God saved our marriage. And so we have a passion for that. We want to help other people realize it's not about feelings. The world will tell you, some secular therapist will tell you, you know what, hey, if you're not happy, then you should go somewhere and be happy. Find somebody who can make you happy. And there's a book that we just love. It's called Sacred Marriage. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's written by a guy whose last name is Thomas. And the subtitle of the book is, What If Marriage Were Designed to Make You Holy and Not Happy? So I firmly believe that as we became holier, as God drew us closer to him, he blessed us by changing our feelings toward each other. I mean, that was, you hear people say, well, if you don't feel it, like it's never going to come. But that's actually not true, because God can change hearts, and that's what he did with ours. So anyway, God has totally worked in my life in ways that I cannot say that it would be anything else but him, because it's so clear and it's so crazy amazing what he did and the results of it, that all I had to do was just give it to him and surrender it. I had an encounter. We talk about how angry I was. I had an encounter with at our church with God, where he said, I want you to imagine a time when you were yelling at your children, raging at your children. I want you to imagine that. I'm like, really? Do I have to? I don't want to go there. And so I imagined that time that I yelled at my son for not being able to fold a towel the right way. And he said, okay, I want you now to scan the room, and I want you to look and find out, where am I? And it brought me to tears in that moment, because he was sitting with my children, distracting them from my anger and caring for them in a way that of course he was there. And he said to me, I protected them, and I love them more than you do. And from that moment on, I could tell that story without crying. And I could never do it before. It would always bring me to tears, because I always felt so terrible about, when you're a mother, you want to do that well. Like, women want to be good moms, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes we just don't have it. But what we do have is that co-parent who sits with us, who sits with our children, who intervenes when we don't know it and can't see it. And then later he says, I was there the whole time. So I'm getting the chills when I tell the story, because it was so raw and so real and so healing, that I felt like, okay, I can finally forgive myself, because he did that a long time ago for me. Like, he doesn't hold on to that stuff, and I was holding on. And so now I can look at it and say, yeah, I wish it wasn't that way. I'd love a do-over, but it was what it was, and it didn't surprise him at all. And he knew he was right there in my living room. And so I just want everybody to know that when you're having a really hard time, God is in your living room, right? Mm-hmm. He's just right there. And we may not be able to see what he's doing with our kids. We may not be able to see how he's co-parenting with us. But at some point, he may tell us, like, hey, look here, because that's what I was doing. At some point, we may get a chance to see it. But we just need to trust and know that he is so incredibly faithful, that there is nothing we can do that will get in the way of what he wants for our children. There's nothing. Amen. So, yeah. So those are all the things about, my life that have been kind of like really foundational and really formational for me, and have really inspired my desire to help women who are going through divorces, to mentor couples with my husband. We do some premarital mentoring, which we just love, because we can bring a perspective to people that others may not have, simply because we know what divorce is like. God says, I hate divorce, but God never, ever said he hated the people who got divorced. And I think the reason he doesn't like divorce is because he has such a grander plan for our marriages than we could ever imagine. And anything less than that, he doesn't love. And so he has given us, and he's the King of redemption. He has redeemed every single painful time, every single tear, every single hard conversation, every single angry moment. He's redeemed it all. And there is great hope, because he can do that with everyone, and he will do that with everyone. And it's just a beautiful thing. So.
Well, I'd love to reach out to you for a couple of pieces of advice, because I know I have quite a varied audience out there. And I would love to hit and speak to a couple of them, because I've had people on times in the past for a number that have struggled with a number of these things. Either they shared that they did, or I know them, they're friends of mine, and they have struggled with these things. A big one, obviously, today in culture, which isn't talked about as much, that you brought up at the start, was the depression.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone, because I can almost guarantee there's going to be somebody listening at some point in time that is struggling with that. They're in that darkest moment right now. What would you say to that person?
Well, the first thing I would say is don't let the enemy get you there. Don't let the enemy keep you there. Don't park there. It's okay to drive by. Don't park there.
I like
The
that.
other thing I would say is God heals, and he heals depression. And sometimes he delivers us from it, and sometimes he gives us really good doctors who can give us medicine. I happen to take an antidepressant. It is life-changing for me. And I know that that was a gift that he gave me by finding somebody who was able to see that I needed it. It feels, and for people who love people who are depressed, there's also a call to action. It's not about having enough energy. It's not about like, just get up and go. It's not about that. It's actually about surrendering and saying, if it's so bad that I can't enjoy the things that I used to enjoy, or there's a feeling that I have that life would just be, things would be better without me, or whatever that is recurring for you and feels like the enemy is just hitting you with it, reach out, get help. Lots and lots of counselors these days are seeing people virtually, and there is no reason you even have to leave your house to do it. It doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to suffer with it. And for me, I'm sure one of the reasons I behaved like I did was because it was untreated depression. And so that just creates this anxiety, and that creates this intolerance to frustration, and it feels like it's so heavy. But when you get some help, there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's a journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint, but there is help out there. And I would say, if you can live better with chemicals, and God gave people wisdom to create those and distribute those and prescribe those, then don't be afraid to take them. God is not angry and does not expect us to do it without. In addition, he doesn't expect us to deal with our depression alone in isolation,
100%.
because that is where the enemy has his field day, when we're by ourselves. And so find a group, find a community. Can I do a plug for Celebrate Recovery?
Oh, yes, especially for Celebrate Recovery, please.
Yeah. Celebrate Recovery is a free group, and it sounds like it should be just for addiction or whatever, but it's actually this umbrella group that covers every single thing human beings deal with that cause an obstacle to be formed between them and their creator. There's just a ton of things, whether it's rage, depression, anxiety, pornography, any other kind of addiction, poor coping skills, relationships that are going wrong, anything under that umbrella that we deal with as human beings. I frequently say everybody could benefit from this group. It isn't just a group where it has to get bad. And so find a group. We have one at Grays Lake, at the Grays Lake campus, that is phenomenal. And it's about 45 people every Tuesday that get together. And like I said, it's free, and it's people that have actually been through difficulties and have come out the other side, who then decide, that was so cool what God did in my life, that I'm going to actually help other people figure that out and find him in it too. So it's not like you're walking into a bunch of people who don't know what you're feeling or what pain is like. So find community and get yourself to it, and know that the hardest thing to do is the thing that you have to do the most. Because leaving your house is going to feel like sludging through quicksand if you're depressed. But it absolutely is the best thing you can possibly do. And I guarantee you, while you won't feel like getting there, you'll be really glad you did once you go. Yeah.
Well, Cathy, thank you so much for just pouring your heart out in so many different directions. That it's like, I can tell, like, I love the idea of like pouring out because we're overfilled Like there's a distinct difference between pouring out with what little you have left compared to being so full of God that there's got nowhere else to go except for out to others. And that's very apparent here. And I'm so happy and comforted and excited by all of that. So thank you for just making yourself so available to people of different stages and areas of their lives. And I know you do it 100% because it brings God glory and it helps his people. And it makes me happy.
People think I'm a little weird because I actually gravitate towards people who have difficulties, but because I know what it's like and because I know how it can be, I feel compelled to tell people, you don't have to live this way. Just have somebody who cares, like walk with you. And we have a lot of people at the chapel that can do that. Other churches have a lot of people there that can do that. Find a support group that it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg. Get to therapy if you need to. All of those things I did, by the way. And I was really grateful that I did it, really grateful. And because of my experience, that's how divorce care got started at the chapel. Because I knew I had to bring that to people because I remember what it was like to go through that and how alone I felt. So there's lots and lots of places you can go. Divorcecare.org will give you all kinds of divorce care groups, and griefshare.org will give you any area grief share groups.
We had Grief Share on a couple months ago, sharing really wonderful, powerful tools that the Lord has blessed us with.
Yeah. And they're awesome, and they're Christian based. And so you're not hearing anything but how God feels about what you're doing and what you're going through. And it's very comforting, and it's a beautiful thing. And when you hear people in those groups, you walk by midway through and you hear them laughing, like, that's just super healing. And it's just what God intended. And there is joy at the end of it. In spite of how difficult a journey may be, there is joy at the end of it, for sure.
Well, Cathy, once again, thank you so much for spending this time with me and the audience. Thank you for allowing yourself to be so vulnerable, to share your life and your stories with us.
It was my pleasure to do. Thank you for having me.
And audience, thank you so much as always for listening. I couldn't do this without you.